Welcome back to Beholder to No One, a D&D podcast. Today I'm here with Alan from CFTRPG. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and you might recognize Alan from, if you haven't seen his stream, you might recognize him from our Savage Worlds Deadlands game, where you played Jericho.
I did, yeah.
For 2 very long games that had lots of rescheduling, but that's okay. But that was fun. It was a lot of fun. I got to dip my toe into Savage Worlds, and now I've played 3 times.
Well, then you're well on your way to becoming a game master.
Savage Worlds Game Master. Next step. So we're here to talk about Adaptation, because that is something that you do in your CFTRPG Twitch channel on every other Wednesdays, I believe it is. You do a Savage Worlds Curse of Strahd game where one of my friends, Ellen, plays in from Birdhouse Mysteries. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it is every other Wednesday on Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/CFTRPG. And what I've done is, as you said, Ellen plays in it, and she was the one who kind of reached out on Twitter, and normally she plays Savage Worlds, but she was really interested in the Curse of Strahd module. And I was currently running the Curse of Strahd module at the time, and I really love that module. It's one of my favorite D&D modules. So I said I'd be more than happy to run it. And so she's put out a call for more players, and we got more players in. And I said, hey, did you want to stick with 5e? Because I know you really like Savage Worlds. And she said, I'm good with either way. And I said, well, I can adapt it to Savage Worlds. It's not an issue at all if you want to play the system that you like. So, we found more Savage Worlds players, and that's how that game got started.
So it was really cool that you transposed it to a different system. I actually have seen other people do that as well with Shadowrun 5th edition. But there's a lot of times where people do it from like 3rd edition to 5th edition for Dungeons and Dragons specifically, or like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons to 5th edition. And they take it from one edition of the same story or the same gaming system to this just a more advanced, upgraded, slightly tweaked system. But it intrigued me when my friend did it for the first time, because it opened the door for them to explore a world for a genre that they've never explored before, but in a system that they were familiar with, which I think could bridge that gap that a lot of people are intimidated by with new systems. And then it let them say, oh, well, I really like this world. Now I want to see how this plays how it plays in the actual game. So for this example, maybe Ellen never, hypothetically, I know she has, but maybe she never played 5th edition, and you tweaked it to be Savage Worlds so that she could get a taste of what Curse of Strahd was like. And then she's like, oh, I love Curse of Strahd. I love Barovia. I love this setting. And then jumped into the 5th edition setting now, or game system now, because she's like, oh, okay, cool. Now I understand the world. I love the world. Let me try the rules.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times there are a lot of different RPG settings that are out there that you might not be really familiar with the system, so you may be put off as a player or even as a GM about running that setting because you're not very familiar with the rules. And learning a whole new system, it's not hard, but it does take time and getting player interest. If you're a GM trying to get player interest, like, hey, I like this setting. I really want to teach you guys this new game. But if they are playing Dungeons and Dragons, if that's their main shtick, then they might be put off on trying something else because they're very familiar with Dungeons and Dragons and they don't really want to take the time to learn something new. So that's where a lot of times when I've adapted, that's kind of the reason why, is just because I've had players who really liked a particular system, like Dungeons and Dragons, and I wanted to show them another world, another setting, but I had to adapt it to a setting. And I've adapted a lot of stuff to Dungeons and Dragons 5e outside of the official published stuff, just because the group I had was very familiar with 5e, and 5e's been very popular over the last 5 years. So it was a lot easier to gain interest online through like Twitter or Facebook and find players who would want to play in a game that was Dungeons and Dragons. So I could easily say, hey, this is the setting. It's sci-fi or it's Wild West or something like that, but we're going to be using the 5e system. And the players are very familiar with that, so they're more likely to get on board.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that helps bridge that gap, because that actually is how I got into Shadowrun, which I've said the story before, but I played a 5th edition version of it, or a D20 version of it, I should say, that my friend made, and it helped me step into that world without being intimidated by how many D6s do I roll? Like, there are so many D6s. So I was able to enjoy the character and enjoy the story and still use the logic that I already built into my brain from playing for God knows how long. And then when I actually tried it, I'm like, oh, okay, this makes a little bit of sense. It's still very confusing, but because I love the world, I'm more comfortable and confident with trying it. So Savage Worlds is still newer to me. I've officially played in 3 games now. And no, 4 games? 3 games. I don't know. One of the 2. 3 or 4 games now. And I understand a little bit more. So now if I listen to you DMing it or Ellen DMing it, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Oh, okay, I get what aces mean now. Like, I'm starting to get what those terminologies mean. Other than 5th edition, is Savage Worlds like one of your go-to systems if you had to pick, or did you just play it because Ellen was like, I know Savage Worlds?
Savage Worlds is one of my go-to systems outside of Dungeons and Dragons. Another go-to system of mine is the Fate RPG system. And the reason why I like Fate and Savage Worlds more for adapting other settings, whether it's something from TV or the movies or from fiction books, those settings or those systems, Savage Worlds and Fate, are very, very adaptable because they're universal systems, so you could pretty much just make those systems. The rules are all there in the book. You just have to pick and choose what rules you want to apply. And then really it's up to the GM and the players just to kind of flavor the rules and the powers and the abilities and the skills to the setting. So it's very easy to use those 2 systems to do that. Whereas Dungeons and Dragons, it's very good at fantasy because the whole rules are built around having like that high fantasy magic and having the different ancestries and the classes and those kinds of things. So it's very in tune with high fantasy settings. But just kind of out of the box, D&D, at least D&D 5e, it's a little difficult to finagle into a different genre like sci-fi or Wild West or something like that. Now that's not to say that it hasn't been done, because there's some really good adaptations out there that have been published.
Like the D20 system?
Yeah. So there are some really good ones out there. So it's not to say that they can't be done, but my go-to as far as when I'm adapting something over is generally with Savage Worlds or the Fate system.
The Fate system I think I've heard of before. Remind me what it uses for dice. Does it use like the D4, D6, D8 type system, same as Savage Worlds, where it improves?
No, it actually uses only 4 D6s, and the D6s, which you can use standard D6s, or what you would get is fate dice or fudge dice, and these dice have a blank side and then a minus side and a plus side. And so you always roll 4 dice, and then you're trying to hit a TN, so like 2 successes or 4 successes. So any pluses are a success, any minuses subtract a success, and then blanks give you nothing. And then generally you have some sort of modifier that's either going to be based on an attribute or a skill set.
Oh, okay. So it's pretty simplistic rule set and easy to follow. So that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Fate is a lot of the mechanics get out of the way, and it's more dependent on the GM and the players to come up with the narrative story. I would almost put it right there with Powered by the Apocalypse system, where the rules are very simple. It's more reliant on just everybody working with each other to tell a good story and be very narrative versus relying on a bunch of mechanics.
I've been playing a lot of games like Mall Kids and Honey Heist and Lewd Grannies, like games that are very simplistic. You don't really have traits, or if you do, there's like very few traits to focus on. And all 3 of those games, when I DM'd them or when I played in them, it was very much figure it out as you go. So you didn't, as for Honey Heist, for example, I made a couple of rolls at the beginning and I planned out a little bit. Like I planned, what does the setting look like? What does the convention look like? Who runs it? And where is the thing hidden that they needed to accomplish? But I didn't really plan out like where they were going as a railroad system. And then I was just like, okay, here's your first obstacle. What do you do? And from there, they roll to see if they succeed or fail. I never roll a die. And I kind of enjoy that. Like, I like the roll-offs every once in a while, or the DCs, but in like Honey Heist, you're only comparing against your own DC that changes and fluctuates as you improve or fail, and you have to keep an eye on it, and I like that system too. Mall kids use the same process. You have 2 traits, 3 and 3, and if you can only have like, it would, if one goes up, the other goes down. And if you get all the way up to 1, then you fail. Like, you lose as a player, which was an interesting concept.
Yeah, I like games that have little shtick mechanics like that and kind of rely more on player initiative, on like coming up with schemes on how to get around obstacles versus just relying on a list of powers or a skill list or something like that. I definitely really like, especially teaching new players, I like to use more narrative systems, or even if I'm using Dungeons and Dragons, I try to like tell them like, don't really pay attention to the sheet. Just tell me what you would want your character to do, and then we can figure out like what you need to roll. So I always can try to encourage more about the narrative and the role playing, and then either use the rules as they are in the book. Like, okay, sounds like you're trying to do a skill check, and here's the skill associated with it. Or as the GM, because I know the system, most of the time I could say, well, there's maybe not really a particular skill or a power or something like that would address what you're trying to do. So then I just kind of come up with a TN in my head, and then let the player know, hey, just roll a D20 or roll whatever dice that we're using the system for, and then add the particular modifiers that are needed.
Yeah, I did something like that for a game that I just ran. It was my final session for a 5th edition homebrew game that I was running just for fun, not for not recording. And we did our very last game, and I kind of was like, I could do plan something epic, and I could plan like this whole god battle where you have to fight to the death, or you guys could tell me what happens. And we did a skill challenge, which I first heard about recently from my DM for the whole Clearlight, where you have an X number you have to hit, and if you hit the fail first, you lose. If you hit the succeed number first, you win. And you tell them what you're trying to do and what you're rolling, and then the DM gives you a DC. So I did that, and I said, okay, well, here's the deal. You're going to tell me what you're doing, what you're rolling, and then I will give you a DC. And it was 20 on the first round, 25 on the second round, 28 on the third round. They were like level 20 at this point, and then 25 on the 4th round. And if they succeed, I say, you succeed, here's what happens. What does the next person see in the next room? So then they have to describe what the next room is and create a challenge for the next player to accomplish. And they just kept doing that and going through the list until we were at 17 successes and 4 failures. And we had to see which would happen first. 3 more successes, which they had a very high chance of, or 1 more failure. And they got that 1 more failure. So then the god appeared and fought them.
That's awesome. And I like that idea. I like putting some of that GM burden, so to speak, on the players and having the players come up with the obstacles that they have to overcome, because then, they feel like they're having more at stake. They're putting more into the game than just kind of experiencing whatever it is that you put in front of them.
Yeah, exactly.
So I really like that. Yeah.
It did lead to a couple of times where they're like, oh, well, there's an obvious door that needs to be lockpicked by this person with lockpicks, knowing fully well that person can not roll below a 33
right.
on the lockpick roll. And I'm just like, go ahead, you succeed. Unless
right.
you roll a 1. And he's like, well, I can't roll a 1. I only roll 10s on this. And I'm like, God damn it. Eventually, like, there were some where they're like, oh, can I incite it? And I'm like, no, you can't incite this. Like, it's an object. Right. Try again.
Yeah. There's no emotions to read, no body language.
But ultimately, they fought, and I was actually really impressed. So they, at the beginning of the last game, I knew that they had like 2 sessions left. So I sped through them getting these legendary items, thinking they were going to fight a god at the time, because I didn't plan this out at all. I was just like, yeah, sure, whatever. So I gave one of the players the Deck of Many Things, which was a horrible, terrible mistake. Because he then went and pulled, he's like, I'm going to pull 3 cards. and he pulls 3 cards. Good things and bad things happen. The first thing that happened was he lost all of his shit except for his magic weapons.
Well, I mean, if all things to lose, if it was just mundane gear, that can be recovered.
Yeah, it was really funny. And then he's like, I'm gonna pull 2 more. I'm like, okay. And after every card, I'm like, do you keep pulling? Are you done? He's like, no, I said I pulled 2. So I finally got to, there were 12 cards in the deck. He finally got to the 9th card, and he finally got the void card.
Oh.
Where I had him vanish to the place that the gods were at and be trapped at that point. And then they tried to wish him back with a wish spell. And the instructions state on the void card that, or whatever they use, I think it was wish, that it tells them where he is, but does not bring him back. So then I had them go get him, even though technically, and I emphasize clearly because I put them in sigil, because that's the one I've done the most experience research on. I'm like, you cannot technically teleport here. This is only being done because we only have like 3.5 more hours of gameplay. If you ever plan to play this game in the future with any other DM, this is not how this works. But it was just because of that, he had 2 wish spells. And in the fight with the god, they fought the Lady of Pain, who is the protector of Sigil, or whatever. She's like the person who runs Sigil. She banished this one character to a pocket dimension. And after they defeated the god, he didn't return. And he rolled that he was going to be trapped there for 8 months. And then he would get to roll again. So I'm like, I'm going to go to the restroom, talk amongst yourself. You technically do have an out, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. And then I gave them time to deliberate, and he used his wish spell to wish all of them in the right room where the gods were trapped. So I gave it to them because it was like the last session, and I didn't feel like thinking of like a way to screw them over, because it was clever of them to remember he had the wish spell to begin with, because he's a rogue. And he only had it because of those cards. And then they used Dispel Magic and rolled a nat 20 on Dispel Magic on the door. So they rescued one of the 12 gods that were trapped. And then slowly between the gods and them, they were able to rescue the rest. So we did it was really fun though, because they got to have a little bit of fun with their story. And then we got to have all their closures with everybody and seeing their gods and rescuing the world. So it was fun.
Yeah, that's nice that they got to wrap everything up and they were able to figure out that they had the wish spell that they could get where they needed to go.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the one player who normally had wish had already used their 9th level spell, so they didn't have it because they thought about it, but then they were like, "Oh right, the rogue has wish." Mm-hmm. What's your favorite, or one of your favorite stories from when you've DM'd or played in a game?
Oh, let's see. One of my favorite stories from GMing. I would say one of my favorite stories is going to be when I first started streaming online, and I was adapting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Fate. Actually, I was adapting a bunch of my childhood cartoon favorites to Fate system. I did Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, X-Men, Batman. So I did a lot of my favorite cartoons to that system. And the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles one, which this year we just did a follow-up to that first game that we ran like 4 years ago. But that first one that we did, all the players, everyone was a fan of TMNT, and they really, really embodied the essence of each one of the turtles. And you could really tell just as a GM, I'd set up the scene, but most of the time I just hung in the background, and they really just got into the characters and role played the 4 turtles as brothers, and they, bickering with each other and pranking each other just like brothers would. And we just had a really great game, and the story in there is just really, really good, to the point I've had so many different comments on the YouTube just coming up about how awesome that game was, which reminds me, just as far as stories go, I did an Avatar the Airbender with that system with Fate, and that one it was a one shot, but we played, I think it ran for 5 hours, so it's a 5-hour video on YouTube, but it is
very nice.
Yeah, but it is probably my most watched video, and I've gotten just so many comments about how it was such a great story. It was very much the essence of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I think that's, for me, that's why I like adaptation, or at least how I figure I do it so well, is that I really kind of steep myself in whatever I'm adapting. So if I'm adapting, say, like if I was going to do Marvel Avengers, I would really kind of try to embody the essence in whatever system I'm going to run in it, and whether it's D&D or something else. I would really just try to put a lot of the flavor and not really worry so much about the mechanics, because when you get that feeling across the table to your players and say, hey, this is the Marvel universe, right? Like, you've seen the movies, you've seen these characters do what they do on film or in the comics. Embody that, role play that, narrate those types of actions that way, and we'll let the dice fall where they will. Don't really worry about all the other stuff that may get in the way, as far as, how do we come up with mechanics or rules for this? Like, yeah, don't worry about it. Like, just tell a good story and we'll figure it out. We'll just say, hey, roll a d20. If you get a 15, that crazy cool stunt that you were trying to do, like, you pull it off, and everybody has a great time.
Yeah, those are always fun when it's just like, it's more story based. And like, honestly, sometimes I get caught up in the roles, like what the dice say should and shouldn't happen. But there have some of the best games have been what is, like, just do it. Like, let's see. Like, there's still a chance of success or failure, but it's not nearly as bad or as unlucky as some of the other systems can be. But yeah, that's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles one sounds awesome, though. I want to try that one day.
Yeah, that's Fate. It's definitely it's like I said, it's like Savage Worlds in the sense that it's basically a generic system, so any genre, any setting can apply to it. You just kind of pick and choose what rules kind of best fit that feel that you're going for.
Mm-hmm.
But I know plenty of people who adapt stuff like that to D&D, and they just make it work. So, definitely go with the system that you feel most familiar with. I would just say, if you really just embody the essence of whatever you're trying to adapt, and you get players on board with that, like, hey, this is what we want to play. This is what I want you guys to understand. Like, let's embody this. Don't worry about that. This is D&D, like, sure, you're playing a fighter, but, reflavor it as a, whatever it is for that genre that you're playing in. And don't worry that it's called Second Wind, you're right. It's just, it is whatever it is. And however you want to flavor it, basically.
Yeah, flavoring things is actually some of my favorite ways to just tweak the system just a little bit. And a perfect example is I played a homebrew class called a Plague Doctor, which was not a completed class, and that's for a future episode where I will be talking to somebody and we will be building that potentially. But this class was basically a person who can control health or disease, because they were so used to dealing with things like the plague. So I positioned my character as a lizard folk who used old school medical abilities, like back in the day when we used leeches or like balms and things like that now we know, hey, that didn't do much. But I flavored all of my healing spells as like using tonics or leeches or something like that to help cure the person. So instead of cure wounds, or somebody had a hangover, instead of lesser restoration, oh, here, let me get Bob. He's the favorite leech. He loves to cure hangovers. Here you go. And like, I would flavor it like that, and it was just so much more amusing, because I'm like, these are all my leeches named A, B, C. Like, they're all named A through H. Bob is the hangover one, and this one is this one. Like, I had names for all of them, but it was just a lot of fun to add that little bit of oomph. But at the same time, I was just casting a lesser restoration spell. But
right, but with doing that, like, you've added more to the story, and you've made the class your own, versus playing just that same druid or cleric or whatever class you were, instead of just being the standard, hey, I cast this spell and you're healed, or that disease or that curse goes away, because that's what it says in the spell description. By making it to where it's those leeches or poultices or anything like that, you've turned it from that standard class into your own, like you said, the Plague Doctor, and you can really feel it at the table by just using those descriptions.
exactly. And like, you could technically just take a normal cleric and do all of those things. It didn't have to be its own class. And like, after a while, it kind of gets like, if you've been playing 5th edition for a while, it gets kind of boring, if I like, for lack of a better term. It's like, oh, I cast Cure Wounds again. Oh, I cast Eldritch Blast again. Like, it gets kind of like repetitive.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of people really look forward to new books like Tasha's or Xanathar's Guide for 5e, because then there's new subclasses and people are like, oh, this is new and exciting, because, you know, I've only been using the player's handbook for the last 5 years and I don't want to play just like the standard fighter or the standard wizard or something like that. I want to play one of these new ones.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people, I mean, I'm sure they realize, but I guess they just want something officially published because they find that it's more balanced, and maybe that's a lot easier on a GM or a player not to have come up with this stuff. But if you really think about it, all these additional subclasses and even the subclasses or archetypes, I should call them, in the player's handbook and in these other books, like, it's all homebrew. It's just somebody at Wizards of the Coast like, oh, this is a neat concept, or I'm just going to pull something from another edition, 3rd edition or 4th edition, and adapt it to 5e. Here's how I think like the mechanics would work based on what I want the class to do. And they play test it, and eventually they just get to the point where like, well, we figure it's good enough, and they push it out there to the public. But you can do that at home, just like you did with the Plague Doctor. You should just say, I want to play a cleric, but I want to give it this spin. I want to play a Plague Doctor. I'm like, okay, how do we do that? Well, do we need to change anything? No, I don't think so. I think we just reflavor. Instead of calling it this, it's this. And, you know, my material components need to be stuff like a Plague Doctor would use. And there you go. There's not a lot that you need to translate or adapt. But it's okay if you want to sit there and say, well, at 3rd level, the standard cleric gets this, but for my Plague Doctor, maybe this thing from the bard or this thing from the sorcerer makes more sense. It seems more, or even the druid, it makes more sense that the Plague Doctor would have this ability. Can I swap them? And work it out with your GM. But I've done that in my games too, where it's just like, it makes more sense that your character gets this ability from this archetype versus the one that's there.
Yeah, that's and what's hard, I think, for a lot of DMs, and I know I run into this issue, I ran into this today. I don't trust all homebrew because not all homebrew is created correctly. And if you don't have that knowledge to how to properly balance it, you might accidentally approve something that's way too powerful. And that's a fear that I have, and something that has come across where at surface level, I'm like, oh yeah, that looks okay. I don't see why that would break. And then you see it in action and you're like, holy shit, what did I allow? But even in those scenarios, I would just say something like, yeah, we could try it out. But if I think that it's too broken or it's breaking the game, we might need to rediscuss and balance it out a little bit better, or something like that.
Absolutely.
And this happens with monsters and classes too. Like if you throw I love throwing in, what I just started doing was I just started repackaging something. Like I just take something that looks exactly the same and I just change the names of it or what the appearance is. And that works perfectly fine for how I play. But I've borrowed homebrew monsters and there was no way in hell these were CR5s. Like I one-shot somebody without rolling a crit and I'm just like, what? No, I didn't mean to do that. Undo, rewind. Let's try a different ability. Oh, nope, I still killed you. Nope, okay. Let's just pocket this one. He's not balanced properly.
Right. And I 100% agree with you on the whether you're using your own homebrew or you find something on DM's Guild or something like that, like anything that you use that's homebrewed, you may sit there and put the caveat with the player, like agreement, like I'm okay with you using this, but let's just both agree, like we don't know how it's going to work until you use it. So when the time comes and you use it, if it's too overpowered, we might, like, it is what it is that session, but we may have to scale it back. Or it could be the opposite. You might find that it's actually underpowered and the player's all like, well, I really like the idea, but I just like, I can never, this ability never goes off because the DC is too high or the damage is too low. So it doesn't make any sense to use this. Then you may want to like balance that out a little bit more. But I feel like that's the same kind of thing with the current published stuff too. Like, sure, it's been play tested a lot, but there's a lot of times I've played with other players, and it's like I would never, I have this ability in my as part of my archetype, but I would never use it because when am I ever going to use like the assassin? When are we ever going to spend this amount of time somewhere that I can study somebody long enough to make a disguise based on them and their mannerisms and all this kind of stuff, right? So it really just depends. Again, it all kind of depends on the game that you're playing and how much downtime, etc. But if you're okay with it, you may say, yeah, you don't have to spend like a whole day. Like, let's just say you spend an hour following this person, roll some sneaks, make sure you don't get spotted, and then you'll have a good enough disguise, right? So you're kind of like keeping the spirit and intent of the power, but you're just kind of bending the rules a little bit so that everyone has fun at the table.
Yeah, I've actually, so I was playing a monk, and I was playing the psionics class with the monk, where you get the arms, the psychic arms, and it was an Unearthed Arcana one for a little bit, and I never used it, like ever. I just never used her abilities, because my character, the way she worked, was run in and punch things. There was no point where she was 10 feet away and she was like, oh, let me spend 2 key points to get these magic floaty monk arms so I can punch you 1 time extra. Like, it didn't really make sense. And I finally just, like, at, like, 7th level, I'm like, can I switch my class, please? Like, I want to say monk, right, but can I just be any other monk ever? That I can actually do something that I'll do, because I never used the ability, so I was missing out on like a lot of a lot of features. So I went way of the open hand, and I fucking love it. I'm having so much more fun because between that and the homebrew feat bone breaker, I'm just a beast on the battlefield or in the fighting ring, depending on the day. And I always do flurry of blows. Like, I never use anything else.
I love the monk. It is definitely one of my favorite 5e classes, and I liked the concept of the astral self, but I never had the opportunity to play it. So I did like you did. So I don't know how well, how easy it is to pull off those abilities that the astral self has. But like when the first time the 5e book came out, Way of Open Hand is like, out of the 3 subclasses in there, Way of Open Hand, Way of Shadow, and Way of the 4 Elements, Open Hand is like the go-to. It's the quintessential monk. Way of Shadow, definitely if you want to play like the ninja, there's that. And then Way of 4 Elements, like anybody who's a fan of Avatar, that's like, oh, that sounds really neat. And it does sound really neat on paper. But from what I've seen, it's almost not worth it because it's costs so many key points to cast any of those spells. Whereas like if you're, maybe if you just multi-class into sorcerer, you can get the same stuff and it'd be a lot cheaper, a lot easier to cast. So that's where like it seems like if I had a player like I really want to play this Way of the 4 Elements, but like it's too costly. That's why I may look like, okay, what can we do? Like, can we just drop it by 1 key point? We'll try that out, see how it works, and then just kind of keep going with it.
Right. It's kind of like if you look up the revised Ranger, which I know isn't available all the time, or like the changes they made to Ranger. People made a better Ranger because they didn't like how it was playing. Mm-hmm. And while I'm okay with like the regular Ranger, I don't think I'd ever fully class a Ranger. I would always multi-class it in order to get what I wanted out of it. And people didn't like the Ranger, so a lot of people were like, oh, that's the weakest class. I made a better one. Here's a different one. Here's a better Beastmaster. That is what I let my player use, and I'm just like, holy shit, that's kind of broken a little bit. Like, it balances it a little bit out, but it's also a little bit broken. A little bit. But things like that, the players know what they want.
Right, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's just, as long as everyone's in agreement between all the players and the GM, if everybody's in agreement, like, is it okay that we're allowing this homebrew in the game? Is anybody going to be, upset that, because you're allowing this one player to use homebrew, you kind of have to open it up to everybody and say, does anybody else, want to use a homebrew class or homebrew the class that they're playing? So, you got to open that door, but I would say don't be afraid to open that door. Be open to it, but just have that understanding in place at the table that, depending on, as long as it's fun, we're all good. The moment it stops becoming fun, that's when you have to say, okay, We need to figure out how to keep having fun, but just kind of adjust the rules.
Yeah, and also be willing to say no if it's too broken.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that's one of the biggest things for me is I had to be like, yes, you can do that, but so for example, there was an episode or there's a session where the players cast Awaken on a T-Rex, and I'm like, sure, obviously you're capable of accomplishing that, but there is no way in fucking hell he is fighting with you. No way. Nope, you don't have a T-Rex on your side. He is not joining your party. He is not going to fight with you. We are not going to find out how the hell to balance that.
So did they awaken the T-Rex?
They did.
Okay.
And now they had a friend that's a T-Rex. But
there you go.
I'm just like, oh, damn it, you can do that, can't you?
Charm animal or beast or something? Yeah,
they cast I think it was friends on them.
And
I think
or something like that, yeah.
Something like that. It was like 24 hours and it took 8 hours to cast Awaken, and I'm just like, oh, fuck, it works in theory.
Right.
Damn it.
But see, that's moments like that. It's just fun. Now it's a memory, it's a fun memory from the table.
Yeah, I just had to start like putting my foot down about certain things. I'm like, you could do it, but they're not going to help you in the fight. Because we had zombies on the fight. Then they wanted a T-Rex. They had a wolf already. They wanted a pet alligator. I'm just like, no.
Right.
There's too many.
I think a good example from me is the 5e Curse of Strahd game that I have been running, which just wrapped up this month. But I had a player right at the beginning when we started who wanted their player to start off being cursed with lycanthropy. They wanted to be a werewolf. And right out of the box, for a level 1 character to be able to shift into a werewolf per the monster manual and all that stuff, kind of a little overpowering over the rest of the level 1s. So I homebrewed it a little bit. I adjusted it to where, okay, so from levels 1 through 4, you can shift it into a werewolf a certain number of times per. No, I had them from levels 1 through 4. They had to rely on the moon. They can only shift into a werewolf or a wolf during a full moon. And I think I gave them the keen smell ability from the werewolf. And then from level 5 to 8, or then whatever the next tier is, I was like, okay, now you can shift a number of times per day equal to your Constitution modifier +1. So you're not reliant on the moon anymore. And then I also gave them stuff like they were immune to attacks that weren't magical or silvered, that kind of stuff. So I kind of just pieced it out and let them have these abilities over time versus having it all at one go. And it worked out really well.
Yeah, that makes sense. There is, I think with that one for me, what I would have done would have been you could be the shifter class, and then we can upgrade it once it's level appropriate, that you have lycanthropy instead. That way they would be a little bit more balanced. Because the shifter class is basically just a half werewolf or half were creature in a sense. And you can still transform, but you kind of become a little bit more animalistic, but you're not fully animalistic. And it's treated more like a rage ability than it is a full-on I became a werewolf. I think that's how I personally would have done it, but I like the way that you did it, honestly, because that would work too, and that's probably a little bit more balanced and gives them a little bit more what they want.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways you could slice it. So,
yeah, for sure, and that's the biggest thing is try it out either way, and if it doesn't work, try it a different way, and somebody else might have had that answer already and done it before you, and then you just steal their idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't be afraid to if somebody's asking to change something, go to Google, do a Google search. I'm sure there's that same question's been brought up several times about different class abilities and how to homebrew it or fix it. Cause somebody may think it's underpowered or overpowered as it is probably, officially published. So Google it. And I'm sure there's plenty of Reddit threads out there about how to balance it or whatever it is that you're trying to do. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak.
Yeah, I think one time I looked up something and I couldn't find the answer to it because it was a very specific thing. And it was such a weird thing. But then I asked on Twitter, and even when I got answers, I got 14 different answers. So it's nobody was they're well, what did you do? I'm like, oh, we just decided to do this. And it worked for our game, and it wasn't really worth waiting to hear an official answer.
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't an official answer because it's not in the rule book. What do I do if there's an invisible person sitting in front of this person, but you don't know that they're there? But so you're targeting the person that you can see, but you hit the person, but their AC is different. Like, it was just so specific.
And can you imagine that? So like you said, you reached out to Twitter and you got 14 different responses. But can you imagine when Dungeons and Dragons was officially out back in the 70s, back in the TSR days, and we're talking, from first edition through second edition, and there wasn't the internet. So what they had is they had people like writing letters to TSR, to Gary Gygax, and asking like for official rulings, like, hey, this is not in the rule book, like this is the situation I had. What would the official ruling be on something like this? And that's how a bunch of the rules that into second edition, like that's why they're there, is because a lot of people started asking all these rules questions, and so then they started coming up with the answers.
No, thank you. I am too impatient of a person for that. What do you mean I have to wait for a month for my letter to come back to me, possibly?
Exactly. Like, okay, our game's been on hold for a month, but I finally got the answer here. Yes, you can take that 5-foot step without a attack of opportunity.
Haha, I was right. Screw you. But yeah, that a lot of times that's why I like the ruling of just like the DM gets final say, and then we'll figure out what the real rule is.
Yes.
So there's plenty of times where like I'm not a rules lawyer to the fullest extent of the word, but I like to know what the right answer is so that I can know going forward. Because if it came up now, it might come up again. So a lot of the time, I tend to get a little heated about like one or two things, but I try to tone it down a little bit. But there have been plenty of times where we'll play it like how we thought it's supposed to be. For example, Moonbeam. This actually was one for my game. We had 3 people in a hallway, and Moonbeam says you can just move it to whatever space. So my logic was I could just ram all 3 of them with my Moonbeam, moving it to a space beyond them, which technically made sense to me. So we allowed it, or the DM allowed it. We hit all 3 of them. We did damage to all 3 of them, and then it stopped on the final one. And then we looked it up, and we verified the rules because I didn't know off the top of my head, and it was explained, no, as soon as it hits somebody, it stops. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, now we know going forward. Do you want to give them back the HP? But it was already like 3 people later, so it's like, no, it's fine. We know now for the future. So now I know for Moonbeam, that's not how it works. The one that threw me for a loop was Dispel Magic and Counterspell. I didn't realize that you don't add your proficiency bonus to Dispel Magic. It took me the longest fucking time to realize that. And I literally was like about to get in an argument with somebody on a game because I was like, what are you talking about? No, it's +7. That's my spell attack. And they're like, no, it says your ability. And I had to go look it up, and I'm like, that's so stupid. Why would it do that?
Yeah.
That was a hill I was willing to die on, though. I was like, this is stupid.
Yeah, I can honestly say I've probably been, you can watch any of my streams, there's probably plenty of times that I made a ruling on a rule and it's probably not the way to officially do it in the rule book. But I mean, you can either stop your game and look up rules, or you can just keep the game moving forward. And then, like you can just kind of put a pin in it. Like, I'm not really sure if that's how the rule works, but we'll go with it. And then I'll look it up and in between sessions, like we'll revisit the rule and be like, okay, going forward, we know, like, no, you don't add your proficiency, or the spell actually works like this, whatever it may be. But, to me, pausing the action of the game to like look up a rule, which might be a little bit easier now because D&D Beyond and all that other stuff. But, like I said, I think as a GM, if you're just trying to keep the game rolling, like you said, maybe you only have an hour left in the session. How do you want to spend that last hour of the session? Looking up rules, or you want to get through the big combat that you have for the night? So it's like, all right, it works like that. Let's move on.
Yeah, the only time I think that it should pause is if it is between life and death. If your character is going to die, if it's ruled one way, but survive if it's ruled another way, then that is when you need to be like, okay, hold on. Let's just make sure. because then
Right. That's
you
fair.
would risk like, oh well, the GM only allowed it because it meant I wouldn't die, or the GM only allowed it because it meant I would die, and like it's just he says versus she said at that point.
Right.
So that would be one opinion for me, would be like, okay, let me look it up, I'll double check. I think this is bullshit, but okay.
So does that mean, so at your table as a GM, do you have like a lot of house rules, or do you try to stick mainly to the rules as written?
I stick a lot to rules as written, but there are some things that I tweak for every single game. I will always use flanking.
Okay.
I like when auto fails and auto successes are with everything, not just on attacks.
Okay.
Just because it adds more fun to it to me.
Right.
I will not. One thing I do with like auto fails if they're attacking is I'll make them roll again to see if they accidentally hit their friend instead. But I'll have the enemies do the same thing. So it adds a little flavor, or maybe they'll drop their weapon so that there's a higher chance of, oh shit, now I gotta go get my weapon and blah blah blah. But if it's like I'm going to die and they auto fail, I won't necessarily make it kill them unless it's like a natural one on a death save type thing. Other rules that I use are the bonus action for a potion rule. If you're drinking it yourself, it's a bonus action. If somebody else is drinking it, it's an action. And I have sometimes let it where you can cast 2 spells if one's a bonus action and one's an action, no matter what the level is. Though I know technically, I think the rule is you have to do a cantrip. But sometimes I'm like, well, I mean, you might as well be able to. That's silly. Like, I don't understand why you couldn't cast both. But for the most part, beyond that, most of my rules are based around more of character creation. So I'm with a game that I'm thinking of right now, we have like a couple of supplemental books that are added on, and one of them is called Hammond's Harvesting Handbook, which allows you to have the ability to harvest materials from creatures, from monsters, and use those materials to create magic items if you have that proper skill set. So in that book, there's a description for an artificer who is used as a crafting class versus a class itself. So I specifically made for this game, I said you cannot be an artificer who builds things because that defeats the purpose of the game. The whole point of the game is survival, and building things slowly and by gathering resources, not by, oh, I'm magic, boom, I made something. So like I'll tweak rules like that to fit the story a little bit better. But the players are going into it knowing that beforehand. They're not going to be, oh shit, I had no idea in 3 months, when it's like, oh, well, that's bullshit. How dare you make a mundane item so quickly?
Right. And I like that. I like how you took the artificer and you're like, it's like, I'm not allowing the artificer, but based on the setting and how this world works, like it works like this instead. And,
yeah,
which makes perfect sense. And I think a lot more people should do that. I mean, obviously if you're playing the standard 5e stuff, the rule book is written as it is, but if you make your own homebrew world, there's nothing saying like the wizards or whatever class have to work per written in the handbook as it is in your world. You can, like you said, you can make it. In my world, wizards can cast cleric spells. They can cast healing word and stuff like that, or they can cast 2 spells at one time. Make it your own.
Yeah, exactly. And like there's other rules that I put in there. Like I'm using a book called Wilderness Survival Guide, which I absolutely adore this book. It is such a fantastic book, but it makes herbalism useful, basically. So instead of just saying, oh, you have a alchemist kit and you can make alchemist potions if you spend the money, and the only thing anybody makes with that is a healing potion, and that's it.
Right.
That's all I've ever seen anybody make with it.
Right.
So this one adds, hey, depending on the biome you're in, you can find different herbs, and there's a chance that you'll collect more, and there's a chance you can collect rare herbs, and then you use those and the essences from those herbs to create potions, whether they're weaker healing potions or damaging potions or something else. You can make things from these herbs that are growing wild all around you, which is something that should be in the system, honestly.
Right. Yes. Yes, give me the Skyrim.
Yes,
Give me the
exactly.
Skyrim in my 5e. Same thing with the same thing with herbalism and alchemy. Give me enchanting. Give me the ability to take, a standard sword and like imbue it with, whatever, frost or fire or whatever, like.
Exactly. And that's kind of, not exactly, I don't think, but that's what Hammond's Handbook does. It gives you the ability to collect these materials that you can use to then make yourself some magic items. So, like, if I go into this book and go to let's say the characters want a Skull of Revelation. So, for a Skull of Revelation, it's a wondrous item, it's uncommon. It requires you to get a flame skull, and you have to be an artificer crafting class, not a class, to create it. But once you get that flame skull and you harvest the skull from it once you defeat the monster, you can then make yourself a Skull of Revelation, which will give you a candle that lasts for an hour and sheds bright light in 15-foot radius and dim light for an additional 15 feet. And you can you have advantage on checks in that area, intelligence checks in that area. So you can like go and find items from here. And I'm pretty sure they have those specific things you're just talking about, like the +1 swords. And you could just flavor it with ice or something like that. But
right.
Like, okay, here we go. A Warhammer +1, you need 2 Gorgon hoofs to do it. And then you could flavor it like you have to have a Warhammer, and then you enchant that item with the Gorgon hooves to make it a +1.
I love it. I like stuff like that because it's to me that's more flavor and it's more the role play aspect versus you walk into town and you're like, okay, I go to the shop and show me your +1 Warhammers. And I like that in that aspect where you're talking about crafting things, like instead of just like, oh, I spend in order to craft whatever this lantern, I just need 500 gold of material. So I have 500 gold. So I'm in town. I spend the 500 gold and I craft it. Like, no, like you need to go harvest this flaming skull in order to get the flame essence in order to make this ever burning candle that you're trying to create. I love that. And I also like the use of tools. I think the 5e tools, the artisan tools and stuff, and I think that's and
are underused.
Are so underused. And I know they've come out with more rules like in Xanathars to kind of like spark that kind of stuff, but I just feel it's like so underused, especially if you're running a module, just because like when you're running a module, for the most part, you're just like quest after quest after quest. You're just bam, 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 bam. And you're not really thinking about downtime. You're not thinking about, okay, you guys just you just turned in this one quest from hunting down the orcs. Now we're going to say 3 months of game time, like 3 months in the game passes. Like, now I don't see a lot of people doing that, right? And just saying, okay, what have you done for that 3 months?
Yeah, I miss downtime.
Yeah.
That was one thing I liked about when I played Pathfinder. So I played Pathfinder like once, like more recently. It was in the last like 6 years. And I had so much fun because whenever we had downtime, they're like, what do you do? And I was like, well, we make magic items and we sell them. Like, we had a shop in the town that whenever we earned money, we put that money back into the shop or back into the town. We literally owned like a half of the town. We got like defense specs for them. We got orphanages. We got banks. Like, we built that town up and I loved it. And we would sell magic items and roll randomly to determine, did somebody buy anything? Yeah, we made 5,000 gold. Great. Now let's put that back into the shop. Let's put that back into buying something else or making something else. And I loved it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever happened to like, oh, we've got, because that's always, I see this question brought up all the time on Twitter and other Reddits, is like, oh, my party has like a bajillion gold. Like, what do they do with the gold? And to your point, yeah, like you start buying businesses or you build a stronghold, you build your own town or whatever it is, like you have this stuff going on in the background outside of when you're adventuring. And then like in between sessions, like you said, you're like, okay, we need to roll. Like, did we have a good harvest this season?
Yes.
Like how many of our villagers like caught the plague if there's like a plague sweeping through the campaign, right? Like that kind of stuff to me, I get like, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but for me, that stuff's really cool and neat to kind of pepper in even if it's just in between sessions, kind of do roll tables about stuff going on in your village or town or whatever you're trying to put together. But you did mention Pathfinder, which I think is a good segue, since our topic is about adaptation, in that, and you might have just seen it because I've retweeted it on my account as well. But Savage Pathfinder is the Kickstarter is coming out January 2021, and they are adapting the Pathfinder rule system to the Savage Worlds rule system. So there will be a Pathfinder Savage Worlds core book, and then they're also releasing Rise of the Rune Lords, which was the first Pathfinder adventure path for the Savage Worlds game system. So I'm really looking forward to that, because Rise of the Rune Lords is one of my favorite adventure paths, and Galorion, the Pathfinder setting, has to be by far one of my favorite RPG fantasy settings out there. So I'm happy to see it come to a system that I love. Not to say I don't like Pathfinder, but I definitely, Savage Worlds is a system I very much love, and I would love to explore Galorion using Savage Worlds.
That sounds awesome. What's funny is, like, I'm actually taking something from Pathfinder and making it work for my system and tweaking it tremendously. But I'm excited for that, actually, now that I remember seeing it a couple of days ago, and that seems like a really fun combination. Have you ever played Pathfinder Ultimate Campaign or seen it?
Ultimate Campaign, I think I have seen it. I do own several of the Ultimate books, like Ultimate Combat, Ultimate Magic. I think I do have Ultimate Campaign, maybe PDF, but I know like it gave you a lot of different roll tables and stuff to like create campaigns and worlds and even backgrounds for players, right?
It does. It has a lot of in-depth parts about your character background. So if you use it to create a character, you can figure things out, like, are you an only child?
Mm-hmm.
What do your parents do? What kind of jobs did they do? Were they poor or not? What kind of childhood did you have? Like, you could roll all that if you wanted to. But the parts that I like about that book is if you go a little bit further in, about halfway through, there is a beautiful section, absolutely beautiful, that is about building your own town. And it is my favorite part of almost any game that I've ever played, and that I'm stealing it. Well, stealing is very loosely. I'm using it as inspiration for a homebrew version that's based in 5th edition to build a town. And in their world, it's more for adventurers. So I'm an adventurer. I have lots of money. Here's money. What can I do to build this town up and make it better? I want to steal it and make it into I'm not an adventurer. I don't have a lot of money, but I have resources and time. So I'm going to gather those resources, and I'm going to use my time to build this town and make it better. I'm going to go on specific missions to increase something, to get the materials needed to do X or do Y. And I absolutely love it because it plays with my Excel sheet heart, where you have tables and stuff and you need to plan out a little bit. You need to keep track of all your stats. But it also plays off with, it's very random. So it's kind of like a checks and balances type of thing. And if you get big enough, you have to worry about bigger things like, will somebody attack you because you make enough money now that you are a threat? Do you have the defenses to defend against that? Or are you just going to like, I've been focusing on making all my people happy. We don't have an army. And now we're super big and have no defenses whatsoever. But we have lots of gold. And it's just such a fun concept. And I'm making that part of that survival game I was talking about earlier.
Right.
And I'm so excited. I'm like so stoked because that's my favorite part about D&D is building a home and building a family and building something to grow with your characters that's more than just I fight things. Give me money.
Absolutely. And I can tell you're really excited about it. It sounds really cool. And I agree. Paizo, I like Paizo in the sense that a lot of their stuff that they have put out for Pathfinder, especially just their Game Master guides and stuff like the campaign guide, there's a lot of great stuff in there that I wish Wizards of the Coast would kind of take a page from and do more. Basically, occasionally come out with a book that's for the Game Masters on world building and that stuff versus just players. Here's more classes and more powers and magic item stuff.
Yeah, I think that problem is, and I think I don't remember who I was talking to at the time, but they've done it so many times in the past that those books still kind of stand. if you can find them. There's like the sigil world that I researched the shit out of that a couple of years ago, but that was a 3rd edition or 2nd edition book. The sigil is still the same though. So it's like, I think from a business perspective, it's like, would we make more money giving something like that, or would we make more money giving a new campaign?
Right.
And it sucks because I completely agree. I would love to see more stuff like that, or even if it was like, here's a PDF that has some tips and tricks that we put together from all these old books that no longer are sellable and we don't sell at all, that you can use for your 5th edition game. Would also be really cool.
Right. And I think somebody had said at one point too was the people who buy most of the books are actual players and GMs looking for more powers and abilities, versus GMs looking for there's more players than GMs, I guess, is the thing.
Yeah, and that's definitely true too. And a lot of people who DM, I think, have a style, and those who are newer are kind of usually taken under somebody's wing and taught a little bit how to do it, from what I've seen at least. Like, there's been a dozen people who have like, oh, I want to try DMing, and I'm just like, do it. Like, I'll be here, I'll help you, I'll teach you what I know. I'm not the best DM, I'm not the worst DM, but I'll teach you what I know. You just gotta try, you just gotta play with it and find a group that's willing to learn with you.
Yeah, I definitely encourage more people to try GMing. Just, and there's some people who just don't, and that they don't want to do it, and that's fine too. But if you have a desire, like, I have a story, but maybe I'm not really familiar with the rules enough, like, just go for it. Like, as long as you have a great story and the people you're playing with are, you would call them friends, and, I think they'd be willing to help you in the sense that they can help you with the rules aspect of it, as long as you're willing to tell a good story and have a great time.
Yeah, and a lot of people are worried that they're not creative enough. Honestly, like, there are so many modules out there that give you almost everything you need. You do not need to be creative, and you'll learn as you go how to think on your toes when they give you things that are confusing. Like, if they throw something at you that's not in the book, you will eventually slowly learn how to take that and twist it and make it better. Like, I've grown so freaking much as a DM in the last 6-7 years. It's not even funny. 7-year ago me would be like, okay, nope, the book doesn't say that. You can't do that. But just make it up. I don't understand. The book doesn't give me a DC, so I don't know what to have you roll. So I can't have you just make it up as you worded it.
Right.
I'm confused.
I also think it's okay to, if you're a new GM, if the players choose a different path than what you had prepared or what's in the module, and you're not quite sure, like, I think it's okay to sit there and ask them, like, I didn't really prepare for you guys going and trying to look for this lost child. Like, I wasn't prepared for that. So can I have 30 minutes to prepare? Like, read that next chapter, or come up with something on the fly for an encounter or something like that. I think that's okay to ask for. And or if you did prepare certain amount, like you prepared an encounter, and you get through that encounter, I think it's okay to say, hey, I think this is a great time, this is a great spot for us to end the session. And because maybe that's all you prepared. You didn't come prepared for, maybe you thought it would take longer and it didn't take as long. So, you don't want to put yourself on the spot.
Yeah, and you could also adapt some fun games that will just pass time. If you're in a town, if you Google it, find some tavern games. You want to have arm wrestling contests? You want to have a beer drinking contest? You want to play darts? Archery? Like, there's plenty of games out there that you could literally, let's say you're an hour short, like they went way faster than you thought, and you have an hour to kill instead of ending it that early. If you're in a tavern, just be like, somebody comes up to you and says, you look strong. Want to arm wrestle? Bet I could beat you. And puts 5 gold down on the table. And you just gave yourself another hour, or a poker game or something like that.
Right. Yeah, you'd be very surprised that players just run with that, and
they'll eat it up.
Think, oh, this is good. Yeah, they're like, this is gonna take 10 minutes, and it's like 1 hour later. You're still in the tavern.
It's like, no, 2 out of 3. I was like, this is like the 30th time. I will beat you. Like, you don't have any more money. I will give you my pants. I don't know. They're worth at least a silver.
We're on this quest to recover this like lost treasure. I will give you that treasure.
Anyway, so I think that's the end of the conversation, and we did get off topic, which is normal here, but I think we covered a lot about adaptation, DMing, and just being able to go with the flow. Let's end with one piece of advice that you would give a newbie DM.
All right. I would say, as a new GM, don't be afraid to make mistakes. We all make mistakes, just learn from them and
100%.
do better on the next session. Just take it one session at a time.
I completely agree. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. Please tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me on all the social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch at CFTRPG, where I run various actual plays of different systems like 5e and Savage Worlds on Wednesdays and Fridays.
Fantastic. So thank you again for joining. I really do appreciate it, especially with such short notice.
Well, thanks for having me. I got to talk about one of my favorite hobbies. So
yeah, it's always a fun time. And thank you everybody for listening to this episode. Please definitely check out all the links down in the description below. Welcome to 2021, our first episode of the year. So that's exciting. And we have a lot in store this year. So please keep an eye out on Twitter at BeholderToNoOne for more details about those things. If you missed it, we just did our charity stream on the 31st. And hopefully we would have announced by now how much money we raised for the Bodana group, which I am so excited for. We will be still releasing our episodes for Behold Clearlight as well as Beholder to One Shot throughout the year. So keep an eye on that. And if you want to, you can find me also on Awfully Queer Heroes in the near future for some one-shots and soon a game. So I hope to see you all there and see you on Beholder to No One's Twitter. Bye!